we are the fastest growing economy in the world, right? And on this stage right now, we have anywhere between $2 to $3 billion riding between the people on stage, and I think Rini gave a fantastic introduction to each one of them. But let me once again introduce Imtiazur Rahman, UTI Mutual Fund, CP Gurnani of Tech Mahindra, Sanjay Kukreja, Chris Capital, Prashant Prakash, one of India's oldest investors from Y2K. So Rhythm, talking about investing in India, let's get started.
Thanks, Niranjan. A very good morning to all our panelists. We're looking forward to a discussion. I begin with Mr. CP Gurnani. Mr. Gurnani, we've seen your company. You're the CEO, you're the managing director. You've also spoken once about how you have 1,200 happy customers. You have over 1,41,000 associates. You're also present in 90 countries. The larger point for India today, when you try and think about investment, what are the opportunities here? And also largely, what do you look at? Do you look at Atmanirbhar Bharat? Do you look at the digital story? Or do you just look for the right investors?
Again, good morning, everybody, and thank you. As I was reflecting on Mr. Mariwala's comments and the previous panel, where the discussion was probably lot more optimistic than I had traded for, which was $10 trillion, and Mr. Mariwala saying there is an opportunity in every cycle.
Yes.
So I can only say that let's start from, people that talk to me on an everyday basis. They come and admire the Delhi airport or a Mumbai airport or a compact and a very functional Hyderabad airport, and they always ask what changed in India, right? And the reason I'm pointing it out, not only from an airport perspective, that a government was willing to let go, and the government was willing to say, my role is not running airports. That I would have received at least 10 calls after Air India has been privatized. And we don't realize the seismic effect that some of these decisions create in the rest of the world. That an Air India is privatized is a signal that government really means less government. The third part, we all spoke about the startup nation. I still remember in the same hotel in 2014, and when the Prime Minister gave the clarion call, which some of us, were representing the industry and saying that he expects 150 unicorns. I promise you somebody would have said, daydreaming is good. But today, whether it is 40 unicorns as we have already talking, and we still have those 4 years to go till 2025. Suddenly 150 looks like lowballing. Similarly, when you start talking about these roads or infrastructure, then you start realizing is that yes, India is changing and changing for better. I know there are huge opportunities. From a startup nation to a digital nation to revitalizing corporate, the common thread is technology. And I think that's where the biggest opportunity for India Incorporated is. We'll talk a lot more about the talent, culture, or the right to win that Mr. Mariwala said, but I think India time, that apna time aayega, India's time has come.
Lovely.
Yeah. And Prashant and Sanjay are the guys with the big bucks. So let me start with you, Prashant. He spoke about the clarion call, and a lot has changed in the last 7 years. For you, much longer than that, because you've been investing from a long time. So what do investors look for? What do you guys want when you pump in that money? What do you look for?
Yeah, so I should also kind of take people back in history. Just before we invested in Flipkart, this is 2004, 2005, when we had our first technology fund. We would wait a whole month to get one entrepreneur to walk into the door. So now, how things have changed. So I think there is a seismic change between 2004 and it's not a very long period. In the history of a nation, right?
Yeah.
So I think what's really key is the number of areas entrepreneurship has touched, right? And entrepreneurship is going into areas where, to some extent, the traditional India Inc. or corporate Inc. was not able to go into. Case in point is agri-tech, right? Case in point is Indian entrepreneurs building for the rest of the world. So when you talk about the opportunity, like, the 10 trillion, 9 trillion, 8, wherever this might end up, but when you look at the global enterprise opportunity of building software, while the opportunity to build services from India was one opportunity, I think the Indian entrepreneur now serving the rest of the world through products, I think is a huge opportunity. And it suddenly increases the TAM multifold, and we are starting to see SaaS companies, decacons being built out of India, not being valued or serving customers here, but being valued on NASDAQ and serving customers globally. So I think that is, after Infosys or the first generation of IT companies, this is the first time Indian entrepreneurs have changed the paradigm of not only knowing how to serve others, but knowing what to build for the rest of the world. And I'm sure that's going to, while it's happening in tech, it's going to happen in many other areas. So that's one big shift. The second big shift is areas like agri-tech, right? So 100 million families really not progressed, while our Prime Minister has this thing of doubling farmers' income. In my mind, startups will have to make it happen, entrepreneurs will have to make that happen. So agri-tech making leaps and bounds of progress, right? And I think new supply chains, new ways of farm to consumer, I think there'll be a big new generation of products and business models that will come up, which will help farmers maybe not double their incomes, but at least get their incomes up by 20, 30, 40% in the next 2-3 years, which is a significant shift for that economy.
Definitely.
And finally, defense, right? Deep tech and defense. I think there was always a lack of confidence in Indian entrepreneurs on, while there was ISRO and there was some amount of space-related technologies, but the entrepreneurial investments in deep tech have just begun, and this is a new cycle, whether it is replacement of defense products and manufacturing opportunities in defense, building AI, robotics-based deep tech technologies for India or rest of the world. I think there is a tremendous white space and big opportunity. So this is where I think the reality of 5 trillion going to 10 trillion doesn't look an undoable thing, because it just has multiple cylinders on which this thing can fire. So it's just not a single industry, or it's not
right. Okay, I also want to now get in my other panelists, Mr. Sanjay Kukreja, Mr. Imtiazur Rahman, but I also want to tell our audience, this is a panel that wants your questions, so keep them ready after
they have
opening
the money.
comments.
They have the money in case you're looking for funding. A lot of entrepreneurs in the house.
True. Mr. Sanjay Kukreja, I ask you, you've been with Chris Capital since 2000. You've also been a partner since 2012. You know where all the investments activities of the company are. In today's scenario where startups have really changed the game, especially for traditional sectors, how do you look at it, also keeping the domestic and the international markets together?
So, look, I think I will take this in 4 steps, okay? First of all, just on the macro, I think, and I've been investing in India for the last 20 years, I have not seen a more sort of capital abundant time, right? In terms of capital availability to entrepreneurs. And I think that is an amazing thing for India. You've always had good entrepreneurial talent, but I think availability, the sheer availability and size and scale of private equity plus venture capital plus FDI, if you look at that whole wall of wax today, it's about $100 billion coming into the country every year. And if you compound that every year, and it's structurally there, I think it has a massive impact on various different sectors and how they're sort of going to play out in the country in the next 10 years. So I would say just, the availability of risk-taking capital, whether it's private equity or venture capital, which has now been in the country for over, 20 years now. But I would say last 10 years has really scaled from 5-10 billion to maybe 30-40 billion on an annual basis, has really transformed already, and it is scaling up further. So that's really coming into, is really creating the opportunity for my second bucket, which is the entrepreneurs, to really take risk. Now, India has always had very strong and good entrepreneurs, but they have typically also been families. And I think what you're beginning to see is first-time entrepreneurs, first generation, even second generation sort of trying to do different things. They may be second or third generation, but trying to get into new businesses, new ventures themselves. I think it's very interesting and very a great moment for the country for that kind of risk-taking to really play out. I would say the third thing which is underestimated or underappreciated, I would say, is the role of professional talent in new economy, right? And I've seen this play out in, if you look at IIM batches of, 1980s and 90s, and how many of them actually ended up going into multinationals versus trying to find a way to create value in entrepreneurial setups. I think that has changed dramatically from almost zero, I would say, in the 1990s and 80s to today. If you look at a new batch today, almost 30% is actually going into new talent, is going into entrepreneurship. And even historically, people who've reached, I would say, who've got their training in MNC backgrounds and have reached CXO positions today are willing to say, okay, I'm 45, 50, doesn't matter, I want to come in and work for a startup and really provide the ability for that startup to scale. So I think these three factors, and finally I'll say all of it, bringing it all together, is the governance, which involves how the entrepreneur thinks, is how the private equity guys think at the board, how all of them come together. There's a change in mindset. The mindset is no longer saying I have to just maximize my profit or I just have to maximize the cash flow. It is saying I want to maximize value, which means to maximize value, I will go after creating new businesses. I will have to go after creating new moats, trying to go after new markets, whether it's through M&A, whether it's through new opportunities, through new talent. And when you define your objective function as maximizing value over the long term, which is what I think private equity capital has been able to do because it's long-term capital, but even entrepreneurial mindset shifting towards the long-term value creation, I think is very, very good for a nation.
Yeah.
So I would say these are the four things together which really determine, why India is structurally in a much better place today than it was maybe 5-10 years ago, or definitely 2 decades ago. But we can't just be a bullish picture. I think there is lots of, and maybe we can take that up as a separate question, but I will caution that there is too much exuberance in the air.
Yeah.
And when that happens, typically the biggest mistakes are made at that point in time.
Yeah.
Right? Risks are not fully weighed in. So while you have all of that, I think you can stumble.
Yeah.
And it is at this point in the cycle where I've seen historically the biggest mistakes, have been made. And so extra piece of, caution and advice in the air that be careful. It's a great time, opportunities are great, but you have to really be, careful and not take shortcuts of just value.
Yeah.
You have to create real businesses in the long term, and I really think of, that perspective.
I wanted to ask another question, but because you mentioned, I thought I'll come to this towards the latter part of the discussion, but since you brought it up, let me toss it to Mr. Imtiaz. Why are these mistakes being made?
Why these mistakes are being made? If I draw from the Bhagavad Gita, is the greed. This is a greed of entrepreneur to become billionaire and unicorn overnight. Often they lands up in the mistakes and they make mistakes. So as Mariwala has rightly pointed out, and Sanjay has also very rightly pointed out, you need to have the professional value. The family-owned business, they need to transform towards professionalization. And the corporate governance standard has to be the highest. The concern which we have as a secondary investor, we use through the IPO, investment through the IPO, or also in secondary, about the management, the quality of the management. The transparency in the system, following the corporate governance standard. We manage the public money. We manage, mobilize, channelize the small savers' money to the market. So governance is the biggest point, which we need to always keep in mind. And therefore, I would say the mistakes happen also because a lot of risk-taking capability. That's okay. We can pardon that. Yes, people are going in the business and they're making mistakes. But another point which you are seeing also, the very high valuations. These are startup companies start going and with, demanding a 10x value, 10x valuations.
Yes.
This is also a point I think I would alert both the entrepreneur and the investors to be a bit careful.
Well said. In fact, Niranjan, taking from that to Mr. C.P. Gurnani, do you agree with what Mr. Rahman said? And also, you've said somewhere you believe in extreme ownership and tough love for your employees in your company. At such a time, Mr. Gurnani, when we're thinking of this, there is a word that has really become famous in corporate circles. It's called jugaad. Glamorized jugaad, but what about those companies that are trying to race up? What are the pitfalls, the policies like Mr. Rahman spoke about that they need to keep in mind?
So, I mean, on a generic level, I don't think there is any way to disagree with Mr. Rahman. That in every business there will be people who rely on risk-taking, and we all know that there is a very thin line between risk-taking and being, over-adventurous or whatever you want to call it. I don't know of any businessman who at some point of their time, they have risked the whole ranch.
Yeah.
They put in all their investment because they believed in themselves. So I think there will be risk takers. Number 2 point that Mr. Rahman mentioned is more about governance or the quality of the management. I think they are all, in a way synchronous. So my own personal belief is India Incorporated is still undervalued. India Incorporated is still fighting against the cost of capital, which is much lesser in the overseas market. I mean, yesterday we saw the Jewar Airport. Now, Jewar Airport, did we need a Swiss agency to come and build that airport? I mean, it is very, very clear that we have our own competence. And why would a Swiss build that airport is because their cost of capital is 0. Whereas no matter what I do, my cost of capital is going to be 8 or 9%. I mean, you're creating a disadvantage for India. So I personally believe that India Incorporated, when I look at the potential to deliver 10 trillion, I think it is huge. The untapped industries, whether it is healthcare, I mean, the reality is that Covaxin is locally produced and locally R&D and was done in record time. We didn't have billions of dollars funding a Moderna or funding a Pfizer. I mean, or funding an AstraZeneca, which became whatever, the Covishield. So it is very clear that Indian entrepreneurship, I won't consider a vaccine was produced by Jugaad. So I think it is overstated. I mean, what happened in Ludhiana has remained in Ludhiana. India Incorporated has moved a lot harder and much ahead. So I would rather be a contrarian to Mr. Rahman.
Okay. Let me take it forward from what Mr. Gurnani and Sanjay said. You guys invest and corporates give returns, but that balance between investment and corporate governance, do you see a deficit there? I mean, in most corporates that you invest in or where your investments are made? Both of you can take that. You can go first and then you can, yeah.
I mean, look, I think clearly, if I reflect on, we are now coming up to our 100th investment in the country, right? We have made 95 investments so far. And, and touch wood, it's been a good track record. We've had, almost 75 exits out of also in that period. When I reflect on that track record and see where have our mistakes been made, right? Few times it's been, okay, yes, we paid up and the valuation was a little bit expensive, etc. But I think in none of those situations, because of valuations, we've ended up tripping and, delivering a disastrous outcome on the investment. I think the few areas where we've tripped up, and thankfully our loss ratio is like less than 6%. We've got 3 or 4 companies, actually, which have not done well for us, where we actually lost capital. But almost 100% of those fell in the governance bucket, right? Because of issues related to, how, alignment of interest between the shareholders and how they thought of creating value, right? Could they have been diligenced? Yes. I mean, if you spent enough time and all of that, but there's a balance between risk-taking and taking a call and trying to do that. And with the benefit of hindsight, you can always go back and say that. But I would say that's where we would spend the most time on. It's not just diligence of accounting books and all of that. It's about the people. Are we backing fundamentally good people, people who are oriented and aligned towards value creation and who think of private equity not as debt capital?
Yeah.
That I'm not getting capital from any other source, but who are actually aligned to say, we're going to create value, and here's a partner with whom I'm willing to back and allow him to make returns as well. Now, that's a mindset shift I've seen playing out more and more. Has it fully played out? I think the answer is no. And the way we do it is that I also feel certain sectors are more prone to it. I mean, if you look at IT and consumer and all of those things, you see a lot more professional talent or talent which has come from, has been groomed, I would say, in the best practices of global best practices, right? And so therefore you find a lot less incidents of those types of things. But there are other sectors which involve, and much to a lesser degree today than maybe what it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? But transparency was not there, for example, in government contracts and engineering and procurement and construction and power and a lot of those types of things. And so we grappled with that. We invested in a few of those companies. Over time, we made some money, but didn't make some money in certain situations. We don't do that anymore, right? So governance is an absolute critical factor for us to decide whether we actually go in and invest in the first place.
Yeah.
And you can never say paint a whole sector in a bad brush, but we would just say it is a very, very important aspect, and we look at that very, very carefully, because to us, that is where the biggest pitfall is.
Right now, there is this big debate about crypto, and I think Prashant has a few views on that, right? Prashant, where do you stand on that? I mean, how do you balance it out? I mean, you may want to invest in something, but then there's this issue of
it's really very early days in crypto, right? So it's very difficult to. There is a big regulatory overhang globally, and I don't think any country is going to very easily replace whatever currency or allow another currency to take over. So what we are looking at is platforms which work with the underlying technologies that drive crypto, which is NFTs, blockchains. I think there is value that can be created there. The whole distributed ledger architecture and what it can do. So we are more looking at the underlying platforms and what they can do to fintech and some kind of fintech applications. I think that would be where investors would, at least from our firm, we would be more comfortable rather than investing directly in cryptocurrencies.
Okay.
In fact, I should also ask you, Mr. Prakash, you'd earlier also spoken about startups. They are reigning, unicorns. However, you spoke about the traditional sector also. Has the traditional companies gone through a change, and what can startups do? What can companies, investors do to generate employment?
So I think there is a very nice synergy building up between startups and traditional industries. And this is for two reasons. One, as much as the traditional industry is now looking to startups to beef up some of the digital areas that they have not previously, for whatever reason, invested in. So they can accelerate, and they can look at some of the startup technology, the startup mindset, accelerating their growth within the organization. And this talent, like Mr. Mariwala was saying, I think a lot of the talent kind of aggregates much better and coalesces into a much more powerful, usable model within a startup than within the larger corporation. So acquisition from that direction has been. What I'm starting to see is also startups or unicorns now grow through acquiring companies from India. So I mean, it's all about capital, and you know
Right.
where capital is gravitating today. So, and that will create also maybe scale and acceleration in a different way,
Yeah.
right? So and also startup models are driving India Inc. to change much faster, because it's a question of survival. Right, so they are starting to spin out some of their companies. They're starting to see how to unbundle some of their offerings, and in these unbundled offerings, introduce digital components and bring in new entrepreneurial talent into that. So I think it's waking up everybody, and it's shaking up everybody in a very nice way.
Yeah.
So I think that's the kind of the side effect or the nice impact of startups that I see, that the overall catalyzation of the ecosystem as a whole will accelerate wealth creation and value creation across the board.
Yeah. Well, let me take this forward to Mr. Gurnani. You know, when we joined journalism, me about 12 or 13 years back, and Rhythm around the same time, so we used to, you know, one of the subjects that we would see often when it came to investments were about bottlenecks, challenges, red tape. What has changed in the last decade, if I can ask you, Mr. Gurnani, and I'll have Imtiaz respond to you on that. Have things changed? Are there challenges, bottlenecks that are still there?
So, you know, I want to divide this question into really two parts. You know, what has changed, I think most of us know. What needs to change is, I think, more important.
Yeah.
From my perspective, you know, when Sanjay gives us statistics that out of the 95 companies, only 6%, he has had challenges on corporate governance or on compliances, I think we should celebrate it. Because the world record is even worse. That 6% is actually a very, very important point that we should talk about it. And more reason for it is because that will also demonstrate to the other startups that if you want the right capital,
Yes.
you need to bring in the right talent and the right compliances and the right governance.
Yeah.
Similarly, when Prashant talks about India's need to invest in agri-tech, or India's need to invest in space tech, or India's need to spend in defense, I think it is very simple. You look at India's import bill. I mean, why is it that most of our internal ordnance factories or the HALs of this world have allowed so much of import to happen?
Yeah.
That means somewhere there is a mismatch between India's demands and India's entrepreneurship. We can't be the technology leader to the world and not be able to do defense, whereas Israel as a startup nation, their biggest export is defense.
Yeah.
So unless we ask those hard questions, we are not progressing.
Yeah.
The second part, which is when we look at the future, what do we need to, remove the challenges? It's very, very clear that we can continue to talk about technology being the solution to some of the challenges that Mr. Rahman was talking about, which is transparency, data, information, and being able to take decisions with a data availability to most people around us. But who is consuming that technology right now? The technology is being consumed by Prashant's investee companies or Sanjay's investee companies or some of us or some of the legacy companies here. But if all of them are doing it, that means there is a talent, there has to be a talent shortage.
There is.
True.
Now, can we anticipate it?
Yeah.
Can we say we will need to remove bottlenecks? Why does it take a Vodafone case for 4 successive governments to realize that it created a bad impression about India?
Yeah.
I mean, why does a court case now? You know, I was one of the guys who came in as into Satyam, 2009. That is the same time there were cases in US which got settled and the sentence has been served. We still haven't settled all the Satyam cases. I mean, we can't live with that baggage called legal system and fight cases for 25 years.
Yeah, it's a good point.
So I think there's a lot to be done, but good news is we have come so far because things are progressing.
And I
Just-
also, yes.
No, sorry, go ahead.
I wanted, yes.
Yeah, please go ahead.
No, I wanted you to respond to that, and there's a question in the audience after
Right.
that.
I think in my own professional life, I have seen a lot of changes in the investment processes. Let me give you an example. 25 years back, there used to be only 4 or 5 organizations we used to invest in India Inc. And UTI indeed used to be the topmost. If you allow me, I will share with you, I used to work in the Kolkata days, Calcutta. Those days were Calcutta, now it is Kolkata. And I was played some role to get the name changed from Calcutta to Kolkata. Those days, they used to speak in Hindi. UTI market में उतर गया है. We used to be the mover and shakers of the market those days. Today the situation is, we are not the 4 or 5 only people who are providing the capital. Tons of monies are available in the market. I get a complaint from my chief investment officers that UTI didn't get a proper allocation as an anchor investor. This is a very big shift, and I think this needs to be celebrated. There are a lot of foreign capital is coming in, and people are chasing. Large amount of chasing a very small set of good opportunities.
Yeah.
Let me give you a data point, and then I will hand over to you, Niranjan. Today, the mutual fund alone is funding almost 39%, all mutual fund, of all IPOs from the institutions. It's a very good sign. And generally, it is oversubscribed 10 times, 20 times. It means a lot of money are available to feed the India. And going forward, when we talk about $5 trillion or $10 trillion economy, the challenges which I would like to highlight for all of the audience is, as per McKinsey report, by 2030, we need to generate 90 million jobs. That we need to talk about.
Yeah.
Do we need a capital? Do we have a capital? And how much capital is needed? As per McKinsey report, 2.4 trillion capital is needed to fund this growth. And I think India Inc. will be ready, because the way the foreign capital is flowing, the way the government is investing, the way government is liberalizing. But there's a couple of more things we need to do by the Indian investors.
Right.
Indian investors are saving not in the financial assets. They are saving in the gold. My wife is also a very big investor. I don't know if she's an investor, but she also spent a lot of money in the gold, right? So the traditional saving has to come from the real estate or fixed deposit or the gold to the financial instruments, and we will be ready.
That's wonderful to hear. We also have an audience question. Can we just go across to them? Yes.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Saurabh Saxena from Darwin Group. And I have a question. In terms of as you invest, what do you see the green side of the climate technology, which is in terms of net zero as a potential for investments, and India taking the lead in things like hydrogen and the electric mobility sector?
Yeah, so I think when I mentioned defense and agri-tech, that's my other area that I always talk about, the climate sector. So I think every industry will undergo certain transformation in how they adopt to the new climate norms, and ESG is becoming more and more relevant, and companies are truly trying to adopt it. And so I think Bill Gates kind of mentions this very well about the cost of green. That has to go down to zero. And if the cost of green has to go down to zero, there has to be a lot of innovation across the board in materials, in business models, and I think startups are well positioned. There is still not a lot of capital today supporting these models in India, but I think I'm starting to see early stage funding. One of our unicorns, Zerodha, Nitin Kamath, they're committed about 100 million fund for these kinds of initiatives. So there is capital coming from different sources. So I'm hoping that the next investment cycle in green technologies, and EV and solar, of course, have been more traditional. But even in EV, I'm seeing a lot of auxiliary, beyond manufacturing, a lot of auxiliary models, charging stations and some of those areas starting to emerge. So it's a starting of a new cycle and venture cycle in climate tech.
Well, exciting times in India. Thank you for joining us. I think we've completely run out of time. I think there was one more question, but I've been told, okay, in 30 seconds if you can ask one. I think
Yes.
PK Basu had a question. 30 seconds, PK.
Well, quick question. To turn things around, we're talking about investing in India Inc., but why is India Inc. not investing? We've seen good infrastructure investment by the government. We've seen good FDI. But over the last 7 years, private investment has been relatively weak. That's a question actually from the first panel.
Mr. Gurnani, you want to take that? Yeah.
So I think it comes back to the corporate debt cycle. So let's recognize that India Inc. has also gone through a massive deleveraging cycle. Our debt to GDP was the highest back in 2007 and 8. And again, comes back to the point that CP talked about cases in Satyam not being solved and in the US being solved very quickly. We saw, in the US, a TARP program, banks were sort of, government control was taken over, and in 3 years they were sold back, and the good bank and bad bank was done and, figured out. In India, our gross NPAs only peaked by 2018 from the 2008. It took us 10 years, and painfully, corporate India had to pay the price of it because, debt, your cost of debt was higher because of that, and lots of other factors that played out. And so once you go through a long, painful cycle like that, I think your investment juices also sort of slow down in that, right? And therefore, risk-taking abilities then get crowded out and lots of different issues play up. I think that is one of the primary reasons I feel like, if you look at top 200 companies in India, your debt to EBITDA ratio has gone down from, close to, is down about 40 to 50%. So a very, very major shift in the profile that's happened in the last 10 years. But I see that the corporate cycle has fully played out. NPAs have peaked, particularly in the corporate banking cycle, and already started to improve. Take COVID aside. And now you're seeing issues on the retail side, but I think the corporate cycle has really played out. And therefore, you're seeing capacity to take more loans, credit growth should improve, and therefore investments would follow from the private sector.
All right. Just before we come to you, we've run out of time. We thank this very positive discussion from investors and corporates to get a sense of what policies need to be there, the legal system needs to be improved, and of course, it's raining unicorns. Thank you all for being with us on the summit.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.